Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Good to see everybody on this beautiful Wednesday evening. Thank the Lord for air conditioning. Somebody prayed for heat. Last week it's like 65. Yeah. You might not realize that. We had fall weather last week.
Okay. Summer is here.
Now we're above normal. So anyways, without further ado, let's get this show started. Glad you're here. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, ask for his blessing. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for you and your creative power, knowing you're the master of the wind, the weather, and everything that we see in nature, and in the galaxies and everything. Everywhere we look, your creative power is there evident. And Lord, so just bless us tonight, Lord. Bless Dr. Malone. Use him in a mighty way tonight to just strengthen our faith in you. And I pray we'd all learn something tonight. Lord, help us to pay attention. And I pray there'd be even personal application, Lord. If anybody's here without Christ or watching, Lord, work in their hearts. Draw them to you. Use your creation, Lord, to draw them to you. And ultimately, Lord, that they may experience your great salvation, your grace, and your love. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Dr. Malone, if
All
you
right.
come. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Ryan. Well, I don't know about you, but I've had a fun 4 days. Thank you so much for coming night after night and just being such a great group of folks to talk to. Tonight, this is only the second time I've ever done this, but I thought the last 5 years, as God kind of laid out this path for me, you know, when you're obedient, you never know where you're going to head, but you just kind of follow open doors and open windows, and you talk to people about what God's done in your life when you get the opportunity, and he opens those opportunities if you're open to share it, and you look for them. But I'm going to lead you through the journey he's taken me, and I think I'm going to look back on this period of my life, and I turned 65 this year. It's kind of one of the most exciting periods of all my 65 years, and it's nothing. I started traveling and speaking and teaching and writing more extensively on creation. And I would do one missions trip just about every year. And I've been to 14 countries. And the typical trip, someone would invite me. I would go and I'd speak in churches, often Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, a couple other times. I'd often speak in some Christian schools, maybe speak 10 times over a week period. And it always felt good. I felt like I'm getting the message to a lot of people that wouldn't hear it otherwise. But in 2015, a man who has been speaking and teaching on creation for 40 years, his name is Dr. Carl Baugh, had a television show for 10 years on Trinity Broadcasting Network. He calls me up and he said, because I'd been on his show about 8 times, he said, every year I go to Fiji, and this year we're doing an open creation seminar, open to the whole city. We're going to be going to the University of the Pacific, and there's 17 island nations, and they all fund a single university there in the nation of Fiji, and we're going to be able to speak at that university, and I want to know if you can come. Well, I'm pretty busy, and I even was then, and I said, well, and it was coming up in like 2 months. I said, I doubt that I have the time, and I know I don't have the budget. And he said, well, let me work on that. And he calls me back the next day, and he said, you know, you can't throw a rock in Texas without hitting a millionaire, and there's a widow, and she said she'll fund your trip for you, so it's not going to cost you a penny. I said, wow, that's really neat, but I still, you know, I doubt I have the time. He said, well, let me give you the date. So I look on my calendar. The only 2-week period of the whole year that I had free was the 2 weeks of that trip. So God took away all my excuses. So I went, and it was neat. I did the normal stuff, plus we had the evening seminar. We had up to 500 people, and they had big banners in the city. But the missionary had this vision for reaching the youth of that country. He had started his church right next to the university. I don't know, God put this idea in my mind, and I said, if I was to print one of these devotionals in China, have them shipped to Fiji, 10,000 of them. Do you think we could get into the public schools? And I could do science seminars for an hour for the whole student body, all the high school, junior high kids, and then every one of them would get a book and they'd have a resource. And he got really excited. Well, it took, that didn't happen the very next year. It ended up being the year after that, about 18 months later. So I took the budget from 2 different years, and we printed 20,000 books, and we went over there. And I'd never seen anything like it. First mission trip in 30 years, my wife was able to come on, and that was another miracle. Because a single lady was coming along. Pastor Baugh wouldn't travel with a single lady. He had to have another woman, so he paid for my wife and I to come this time. And she's went on every trip since because she's never seen anything like it. And school after school, it was like, I didn't know a world like this existed, and because it was so completely different than America. Now, since then, we've had 11 missions trips to 4 nations, and we've done the same thing in every one, because I didn't know if it was specific to Fiji. But I want to take the first 10 minutes, and I want to just show you some pictures and tell a few stories. And then for the last 45 minutes, we always have an hour to do these presentations. We save the last 10 minutes, which often goes over to 20 minutes, to give the gospel presentation. And I let the missionary or a local pastor do that so there's a connection. And I'm going to show you the results of that too. So basically, we lay out the case for these kids that they have a creator. And they can know that they have a creator, and because of their textbooks in all of these developing nations, and I'm talking the Philippines, and they're all permeated with evolution. It just shows up everywhere throughout their textbooks. So the kids are being trained, everything can be explained without God. And I'll get to the impact of that in just a moment. But let me first just kind of walk you through some pictures. So we're going to just show some select pictures, mostly from Fiji, over about a 5-year period. The first trip was 2015, and then in 2017 we did 2, 2018 we did 2, 2019 we did 3, 2020 we did 1, and this year we did another one. But here's the kids, packed up, sometimes sitting on the floor. This one's from the Philippines. Now, one thing you're going to notice as I do this presentation later, we don't just give them a bunch of facts. Because teaching, I designed this presentation based on 30 years of teaching and keeping youth in mind. They don't just need a bunch of facts. If you can connect emotion, enjoyment, surprise, suspense, storytelling to what they're learning, they're way more likely to remember it. That's how Jesus taught. And you'll see that as we go through it. But the truth has to be in there in the midst of it too. So this is just as one of the lighter moments of the presentation. And here's the goal. And I didn't just kind of lay this out. I didn't just say in 2015, you know, if I could do this and this and this and design this presentation and do this in order to get into the public schools and give the kids the books and have this vision, this would have an enormous impact. It's like you take a step forward when God opens a door, having no idea where it's going to lead, and then he starts to supply the ideas, the people coming alongside, the abilities, the finances. But you've got to step into that Jordan River first. Otherwise, nothing happens. But ultimately, this is the vision that developed. In America, for at least 2 generations, the public education system has been used to remove faith in the belief in God from the children. That's how it's being used. It's just left out. So at best, God is irrelevant by the time kids come out through 18 years of school, or in the case of college, 20, 18 or so years of school. At worst, God doesn't even exist. And we're seeing the fruit of that. The generation born since the year 2000, and this was going to be part of my Sunday sermon, when asked whether they're, when they get out of college, when they're 21 and above, okay, ask whether they're interested in attending church, believing the Bible, Christianity in general, only 14% of them have any interest in anything dealing with God or a church. 14%. It's never been even close to that low. And when asked why, basically they give various forms of that, but their answer is, we don't believe what the church teaches. Well, of course they don't. They've been told the opposite for their entire educational life, in the media, in the movies, and everywhere else. They have a concept of God, but it's certainly not a biblical concept. What we're able to do in these countries, but they haven't reached the point where God is irrelevant to them. There's no idea that it is by the work of Jesus Christ that they're saved. They still think it's all a works-based kind of thing. So that's where they're at. But there's not this aversion to showing them evidence for God's existence and how it all fits together. So we can use the education system to connect the Bible to everything else they're learning, especially science and history. We can introduce them first to the Creator, but it leads directly to that Creator is also your Savior. And last, the goal is to impact a whole generation with biblical truth. And they're all in the education system. So what a way to do it. What a way to do evangelism. Again, here's pictures of the students. The schools, even in these countries, they leave God out of both science and earth history, world history. God never shows up in their textbooks, same as in America. And we recombine it. We show them how true science supports a belief in the reality that the only explanation that works for why everything is here is that God has put it here, and God has done supernatural miracles. And then these books that we leave are often the only book these students will ever own, other than a Bible. And the Bibles, more often than not, just sit on a shelf because they've not connected to anything for them. And all of a sudden, the Bible becomes real history, real reality, real truth. So it's really, really powerful what we're doing. And look at the students packed in. This is a typical student assembly in the Philippines. 100 million people, 20 million high school students. I mean, they can't build schools fast enough in that country. Well, typically, when we would go to a school, we would have 500 students. In one place we went, we had 2,200 students in a big auditorium, all listening to this hour-long presentation. And you're going to see it. Basically, we start by showing what is science? How does it work? Second, we show them the Bible is not just a book of religion. That's how people perceive it. But it's a book of reality, and it starts with a scientific statement. We show them that the very laws of science point to creation. We show them that life is so complex it could never make itself. Then we connect it with when did creation happen, and that deals with the flood. So a good third of the presentation deals with the worldwide flood. And the end, by helping them understand why all this stuff that's not true is in their textbooks, why scientists who aren't stupid seem to want to believe. 2,200 10th or 9th through 12th graders, and they all gathered for the presentation. So, as I said, 11 trips to 4 nations. We've spoken in 240 schools, 300 presentations, and we've given books to 120,000 students. Now, we started out with that softcover book called Inspired Evidence, 20,000 books. It was our test case. And since this is just informal, okay, and I'll probably go a little bit over tonight, I got some stories to tell along the way, because they're God stories. You need to share the God stories in your life with your grandchildren. They need to hear them, how God has done things that could have never happened any other way. So after that first time, I'm going to come back to this picture. After that first trip to Fiji, and concentrate on high schools. Elementary kids aren't understanding it to the level that it's that important. So from then on, we did high schools. Dr. Baugh, who is this man of gold and faith that's way beyond mine, he said, you know, this is Fiji, and it's humid, and these books are going to be shared for a decade. We need to print, and these people love color, and they do. By the way, this was our team uniform in Fiji. Everybody, one day we would have these whatever color this is, turquoise shirts. The next day they would be red shirts. We'd wash out the ones because they'd get all hot and sweaty, and then we'd alternate every other day. He said, we got to print them in color. And I said, you know, the black and white books I can get printed for about $1.50 each when I do 20,000 at a time. Color ones are going to cost like $4 each. Where's that money going to come from? Because I was told there's about 100,000 kids in Fiji. And we wanted to go to every single high school in the nation. And I said, how's that going to happen? Because we didn't have government permission. We were just going principal by principal. And he said, got lots of millionaires in Texas. Don't worry about it. So he wanted to do it for the 40th anniversary of the founding of the Independent Baptist Church denomination in Fiji that he helped with. And he'd been there 40 times over 40 years. Dr. Baugh was 84 at this point, still going back every year. And I said, if that's going to happen, then we have to know by May in order to get those books printed and shipped there by November. Well, he calls me in May and he says, we've got the money. I got a millionaire and he's got all this money and he's up in his 80s and he wants to make a difference and he sees what we're doing. And not only is he going to buy the books for Fiji, he's going to buy it for the surrounding nations. He's going to fund 500,000 full-color books, 100% paid for. And I said, where are we going to store them? And he didn't know. And I kind of checked in, and nobody had that much room. So I said, why don't we print 250,000 books now, and we'll print 250,000 books next year when we start distributing them. And he said, great. So I call my person I've worked with for 10 years. We get 250,000 full-color books ordered from China to be shipped to Fiji. And a week goes by, and I called him, and I said, well, you know, everything's in the process. When do I get, you know, the down payment? He said, it'll be at least another week. 2 weeks go by, the guy had to transfer funds. 3 weeks go by, the guy had to, he said he didn't work with a broker. They got to get it out of a World Bank. A month go by, and I don't have anything, okay? And I said, we've got to have a down payment. You know, we need at least $25,000. And Dr. Baugh said, well, I keep asking him, and he just told me, you know, he's actually living on Social Security. He just can't get at his money. And I'm thinking, red lights are flashing, okay? So I call my printer, and I say, don't panic, but can we stop this? Long story short, they'd already printed, cut, rolled the paper to exactly to size to maximize it, shipped it from one side of China to the other, and we owned $250,000 worth of paper. And that isn't even printing and shipping the books. And we were committed to it. And it turned out the guy was a total flake. Never gave us a cent. So I'm asking, well, can we print 10,000 books a year and just do it over 10 years? Turns out paper has a shelf life, and if you don't print more than a year, it's unusable. So I said, can someone else use the paper? It's this super high glossy, high wax paper that holds the ink and lasts well, and very few books use it. Bottom line, both Dr. Baugh and I start the process of mortgaging our homes in order to just pay for the paper, still knowing not where the money is going to come from. Went into prayer, and my wife is calm about this, and that in itself is a total miracle. Okay. Another ministry, totally unrelated, saw what we were doing. A televangelist, his name was Jack Empke. I'd never met him, but Dr. Baugh knew him. He picked up the entire paper bill and the cost of printing the first 30,000. We used those for fundraising. Over the next year, people would send in $100, $1,000, people I'd never even met before. Sorry, I'm belaboring this, but it's such a God story. My wife calls me on a trip a couple months into it and says, we got 3 checks today. And I could tell by her voice they were big. And I said, really? Were they big? And she said, they all had a 5 in them. And I thought, well, they're obviously not 50, and I bet they're not even 500. I said, is one of them for 5,000? She said, one of them. I said, really? Were the other ones for more? She said, one of them was. 2 of them were $5,000 checks. She said, yeah. I said, was one of them like 15,000? More than that. And I thought, one of them 25,000? More than that. And I finally said, just tell me. She said, a little church that I'd spoken in 3 years earlier, probably 50 people in the church, sent a check for $50,000 because they had a big missions foundation, and once a year they wanted to fund a significant missions project. And bottom line, God funded the whole thing within a year, all of those books. And here are 100,000 of those books being delivered to Fiji. Last story, okay? So in order to make this work, we really needed the Department of Education of the country to write a letter to the principals allowing us to get into every single high school in the country. So the missionary started that process, and he's working with, turns out God placed the secretary to the Department of Education as one of the leaders of the process of getting into the whole schools, and every school principal knew her. She had recently retired. Set up a appointment with the Department of Education head. Corey, Dr. Baugh, the secretary, and a couple other pastors show up at the office. He is meeting with the parliament that day, and the assistant secretary is standing in, and he's the one that's going to make the decision about whether to go let us into every single high school in Fiji. Now remember, we're public high schools, okay? This isn't just a bunch of religious schools. Well, his assistant comes out and says that Muhammad such and such will meet with you now. And they're thinking, oh my goodness, he's Muslim. The Muslim is going to make the decision whether to let us come in and talk about Jesus Christ and give out books with a scripture on every page into the school system. And everybody in the lobby just starts praying, and Corey and Dr. Baugh goes in, and they explain what we're doing and how we're just connecting science to God, and we're not pushing any particular religion, although we end with the gospel message. But if the principal asks us not to, because we were in, Fiji's weird. The schools can be run by any religious flavor you want. You just use the national curriculum along with it. So there are Muslim schools, there are Buddhist schools, there's Catholic schools, Assembly of God schools, Presbyterian schools, Methodist schools, and so on. And we spoke in all of them, okay? Except of the 9 Muslim schools, we only got into 2 of them. Because the book starts, by the way, with the gospel message that says God's only path to salvation in big, bold letters at the front of the book. And that kind of shut the door to some Muslim schools. We got a little wiser later, like a serpent, and we put it at the end instead of the beginning of the book. So they sit there and they talk to him thinking, there's no way he's going to give us permission. And they show him one of the pages in the book that talks about, what I did the other night, about the intelligence of a honeybee. And he reads it and he says, well, you know, this book's about science. It's not just a book of religion. And he doesn't commit. He's Corey Mears. He's been in Fiji for 20 years, came there as an 18-year-old, and he's now 38. He points to Corey and he says, can you wait a second? So everybody else goes out, shuts the door. Corey sits down, and Muhammad, I forget his last name, he looks at Corey and he says, you don't remember me, do you? And Corey says, no, sir, I don't. And he says, I remember you. He said, when I was 16 years old, living in the worst part of the ghettos of the biggest city in Fiji, where everybody was running around seeing what they could shoplift and looking for drugs and alcohol, this young missionary that was 18 or 19-year-old, you would come around and gather as many of us up as you could and take us to church on a Sunday morning. And since that time, I've given my life to the Lord, and I've never forgotten what you've done. And I will make sure that you get permission to get into every single school in this nation. So something he did 20 years earlier led to being 20 years later being allowed to go speak to over 65,000 students across the entire nation. Isn't that cool? He had no idea. I love these kind of stories. So, here's the books. We stack them in churches, in hallways, all the way to the ceiling. You have no idea what 100,000 books looks like. Actually, we've distributed 140,000 books in Fiji because there was an initial 20,000 plus 120,000. Again, here's what these assemblies look like in different places. We lighten it up in the middle by kind of bringing a dinosaur in, and the students just love it. And then at the end, they get the books. And as I said, they're going to get read over and over and over again. Another quick story. After the initial distribution, those students had these softcover books, and we went to like 40 schools. We came back to some of those same schools with a full color book a year and a half later. And multiple principals came up to us and they said, "You'll never believe what happened in our school." At the end of every year, they test the schools on their proficiency in science and geography and English, specifically English. They want them to understand English well, because the doctors, the lawyers, the leaders of the country are the ones who comprehend English really, really well. And all the school is in English, but that's not their native language. And they said, typically when we've been tested, we're right in the middle of the country for 50 percentile in English and in science and those other subjects. This last year when we were tested, our students tested 95% in science and 92% in English, and it's never happened in the history of our school. And we started asking ourselves, what happened? And one of the teachers remembered, at the beginning of the year, you came and gave every student one of these books in English, and they read it every day. Day after day, they're reading that book. And they're more interested in science. So all these things we didn't even expect happened. Then we're doing the color books. And look at their faces. They're so excited to have this book. They'd literally jump right into them, start reading them. They would shut down classrooms, and for the rest of the afternoon, they'd sit and read their books. And it's a lasting thing that they have there to continue every day to remind them God's behind it all. So their interest in the Bible increases, their comprehension of English increases, their interest in science increases, and salvations result. Now here's where I'll wrap up this part of the slide presentation. This is not an exception. This is really common as we end with the gospel message. And it's really clear, because we know the problem is these kids, we don't have to convince them God exists. We're confirming that belief, so it's solid. But then the point is, this God is displeased because you are a sinner. You will never be good enough to go live with him for eternity. You can never make up for your own sins. But God loves you so much, he's done it for you. He's the one who took care of your sin problem, not you. Hear the different missionaries do it, but it was always that message. And then sometimes we'd ask for hands. More often than not, we would just ask them if they would like to pray. And especially in Fiji, you could feel the sincerity. You could feel the presence of the Lord as these kids were asking Jesus to be their Savior. And you can see it in some of their faces. I mean, if you just check it out, there's this desire to have what God has, because it's all been works, but all of a sudden they've been introduced to grace and what God has done for them. And it's not of ourselves. It's a gift of God. And they're asking for that gift. It's not of our works, lest any man should boast. So that was Fiji. Now, I want to end with a letter I got when I was in the Philippines, because we were there for 2 weeks. We've had 2 different trips, and sometimes it's just like 4 of us. Other times we'll bring a whole missions team. This was the team in Fiji. Let me back up. The ones in the shirts are the team from our church, and we were broke into 2 teams, and 4 of us would go to one school, 2 a day. 4 of us would go to another school, 2 a day, and we'd have lots of people helping with all the props and the book distribution and so on. But I got this letter, and it's kind of small, so I'm just going to kind of read it. You may be able to read along. But this is probably this stunning confirmation from God of how important this is. And it's not uncommon. This is, I think, universal across the education system of the world. This student said, your ministry came to our university, and they call their high schools universities, yesterday. This is 2019, and I'm one of the 12th grade students who listened and was given the book, Explore the World. And by the way, that Have You Considered book, the one that's called Have You Considered, that's the one we use for all the missions. We called it Explore the World for the Philippines, same book inside. I just wanted to express my gratitude for coming to our school and giving away free books. Your book is amazing. Reading a page strengthens my faith. It really did. I don't exactly know how to explain my feelings right now, but I was amazed by your book. I love science. And your book's about science mixed with the Bible. And to be honest, I was slowly losing my faith from grade 9. When I was in junior high school, let me back up. I learned about religion of different countries. and it greatly impacted me. At that time, I was questioning, does God exist? What if the pagans are true? What if Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam, what if they're true? I was really confused. And then comes science, and I learned about the evolution of a human being. Again, I was confused. What if science is true? What if we really came from ape-like creatures? What if the Big Bang is true? All these questions are bothering my mind. See, this is a smart kid. He's thinking through everything he's hearing, but it's presented authoritatively, like it's got to be true. And he didn't know any better. And it bothered me for years. But then your ministry came, and it changed my life. The book changed my life. Best book I've ever had. Last night I was crying, sorry, this keeps jumping ahead, and praying to the Lord, and your ministry came to our university and changed my life. There must be a timer on there. I was asking God to bless you more and more, and the mom was amazed by your book, told me she hopes you're a messenger from God. She thinks it must be. I can't express my gratitude enough. I can't believe how many years I was confused, but now I'm enlightened. You're a blessing from above. Every page makes me love my Creator more. You don't know how happy I am to be back with God again. Isn't that cool? And that's just, there's others. So that's what we're doing. Now, I want you to think about this. Think about the impact if the presentation you're about to see, and it's a little bit shorter version, I'll probably take not much more than half an hour to go through it, was shown to every single high school student in America. That's it. They just got to see and hear this stuff. Right? It's someone who could make it interesting and relevant and show the science, because that's what's happening in these other nations. And the reason I'm taking time to end here is because I think it's so encouraging. Just because we're locked out of things in our country doesn't mean we can't go around the education system and share this stuff with students. That's why I've been encouraging you to get 10 books and put them to use. Get them out to somebody, because they do have an impact. And everybody can't help but read at least the page on their birthday. Now, it's uniquely useful in these countries where it's the only book they're going to own. It's a little tougher in America, where we're so distracted with entertaining ourselves, and kids don't even read books nowadays, but they can still make a difference. So here's where I always start. I will ask the students, you've all heard this first verse of the Bible, and even in these foreign countries they have. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Is that a statement of religion, or is that a statement of science? And I'll ask the kids that. And they're not as shy as American kids. When you ask them a question, they're eager to give an answer or have an opinion. And about 90 to 95% of them will all say, well, that's a religious statement, because they know the Bible's a religious book. So I will ask, how do you know unless you know what science is? You see, science is just a tool, and it's used to understand how the world around us, how creation operates. And a scientist only has 4 things that he can actually study. Science is the study of time, energy, space, and matter, and how it all works, how matter interacts and interrelates with energy, and how it all moves through space, and you know, how time is involved for acceleration and deceleration. And it's allowed us to create computers and automobiles and refrigeration and build buildings and send spaceships up in space, all because we understand creation and how it operates, based on these 4 things. Does anybody see time in this first statement of the Bible? Do you? Where? In the beginning. In the beginning of what? In the beginning of time. It talks about time and where it came from. Does anybody see energy in that statement? Created. You can't create anything without energy, and it gives the source of that energy. God created. How about space? Heaven. The literal Hebrew word for heaven is everything above the earth. It's space itself. It's the template upon which God placed all matter and energy. And how about matter? Earth is literally a word that means something you can touch and feel and taste and hear. You know, it's matter. So everything dealing with science is in the very first verse of the Bible. It's literally the most scientific statement ever made, because it explains where all that stuff came from, and it deals with everything that science has to work with. far more a statement of science than it is religion. Second, there's a verse in the Bible that talks about our responsibility. It says that everybody ever created knows that God exists because God has shown it unto them. How? By looking at creation. We can clearly see creation, so we can test it, understand how it operates, and we can also understand where it came from, and we're held responsible. You see, we are going to be judged when we die. We're going to be judged for our actions and our obedience and whether we've obeyed the one who made it all. And if we disobey even once, we are a sinner, and we no longer are qualified to live for eternity with a totally pure, holy God who is just and must judge sin. We'll be forever separated. That is the reality. And we're going to be held responsible because we can know he exists by looking at creation. But how? And why don't your textbooks talk more about this? As a matter of fact, why do some, and by the way, not all, but the majority of scientists are trained to believe everything made itself? Well, this is the explanation they use. They're trained that there's been a Big Bang, and most people have heard of the Big Bang, an explosion that created all the matter and energy in the stars and the planets on Earth, and it happened billions of years ago. And then they're trained to believe that chemicals came alive here on Earth. Just complex chemicals created in the stars that ended up in water and came together to form life. And then, as one bacteria made another bacteria that made another bacteria, they changed slightly and eventually became more complex forms of life that became fish, that became land animals, that became, mammals and monkeys, and eventually people evolved. And that's all taught as a fact, and that's the kind of stuff you'll see in movies and in the internet and on your textbook, and all these kids have cell phones. So I want to show you a page from a college textbook, and it has this picture of this animal, and at the bottom you'll notice it says, this is the well-preserved skeleton of a Megastronodon. Sounds pretty scientific, doesn't it? Megastronodon. Must be true, it sounds so technical. And it allows an accurate reconstruction of our earliest ancestor. Now, this is stated as a fact of science, that is your grandpa. Well, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. That's what it says. Now, why would scientists say that? Because they've never seen that thing turn into anything else. They've never seen a monkey turn into a person. But there are only two possibilities. Either people, you're all here because God made two original people, Adam and Eve. They had children. They intermarried, had children. Those children had children. And thousands of years ago, all the different cultures of the world developed, including everybody here in Fiji or wherever I'm at. Or something turned into a person. There are no other possibilities. So if you don't want to believe God made people, you have to believe some sort of an apish thing turned into us. Well, what turned into an ape? Where did an ape come from? It must have been something running around in four legs. So these people who are trained to leave God out of their thinking, and that's all they are, they're just leaving God out of their thinking, they believe it's a fact that that is your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. And they teach it in the textbooks, but that doesn't make it true. And it's by using science that we can figure out, did some sort of an ape turn into a person, or did God make people? Because we can't see either one happen, but we can see what's possible. And I'm going to start by just talking about where did everything come from. You see, and I forgot my box. I normally have like a little jewelry box. I left it, I forgot to grab it for this presentation. I hold up the box, and I'll say, if you think of the entire universe as this box, there's only two possibilities to explain. Where did the box come from? See, either the box made itself, or the box has a box maker. And there's no other possibilities. I mean, if the box doesn't have a maker, it must have made itself. But if the box didn't make itself, it must have had a maker. So how do we know which one is true? Now, I want to show you a little film by someone who has studied the Big Bang. And and where everything came from, supposedly. And I want you to listen as she explains how everything made itself, how everything came from nothing. Because if the box made itself, it must have come from nothing, or else somebody made the something that turned into the box. So the Big Bang believes everything came from nothing. Listen to this very smart, very sincere scientist as she explains to you where everything came from.
I'm Jana, and I'm a professor of physics and astronomy. I work on where it all started. The simplest picture of the Big Bang starts with nothing. There's really nothing. There's no space, there's no time, there's no matter, there's no energy. It's nothing but the potential to exist. And out of that burst, time starts, space is created, all of the matter and the energy in the universe is born at that moment.
Okay, now I'm just going to pause it right there. She goes on to talk about evolution and stuff. But notice what she said. Remember the four things I mentioned? She said all of the space, all of the time, all of the matter, all of the energy came from, to try to explain everything as if God has never been involved. Leave God out of your thinking, you got to explain it somehow, so you make up a story. If she had evidence, don't you think she'd have shown it? Well, how do we know for sure? Because in a way, creation's also a story. We don't have a film, we don't have evidence, we can't show Adam and Eve being created. So you've got two stories. How do you know which one's faith? You got one faith versus another faith. Neither one is literally science. But we can use science to show which one is true by showing which one could not possibly be true. The very first law of science, the most tested law of science, says that matter and energy can never be created and never be destroyed. It's the most observed thing that humanity has ever done. Nobody has ever seen something pop into existence. With every experiment every scientist has ever done, every mathematics, every observation, we've never even made a single atom appear or disappear. It's never happened. So we know what the truth is. It's a law of science. Matter can't make itself. The universe couldn't have made itself. It's all just storytelling. And it contradicts what we know about science. So given the two options, we know the box couldn't have made itself. That only leaves one other possibility. And it's not stupid. It's actually logical. The box exists because there's a box maker. The universe exists because there's a universe maker. Life exists because there's a life maker. And we'll get back to that. So, but then there's a second law of science, which is also very, very relevant, and that is the reality. Hang on a second. Sometimes when I go too fast, it locks up. So I'm going to restart. That everything in the universe is actually winding down, deteriorating, degrading, and breaking down. Things don't get more complex all by themselves. They don't improve all by themselves. If you build a house and do nothing, give it enough time, it just completely wears out and falls down. Automobiles rust out and wear out. All of life disintegrates and dies, and there's no exception. We don't see things getting better and better and better and more complex all by themselves. As a matter of fact, I did an experiment. I took a picture of a frog, and this has been about 20 years ago. I tried this. And then I took that picture and used it to make the second picture. I took the second picture and used it to make the third picture. I'm making a copy of a copy of a copy. That's exactly what life does. Life does it far better because God designed the copy machine of life, where information from DNA is used to pull in chemicals and make the very next generation of any given animal. But even with life, every generation has a few more mistakes. And I wanted to see, well, this frog will copy after copy after copy slowly transform itself into something more complex and more interesting with new features and new functions. Well, this is what it looked like after 50 copies. It's not turning into a bird. It's slowly deteriorating. Here's 100 copies later. It's actually losing complexity. Its fingers are starting to disappear. I actually kind of cleaned up all the miscellaneous pixels of random information on the outside of the frog and kept going. Here's 200 generations later. It's not forming feathers, it's not forming wings, it's not turning into a new animal, it's deteriorating. This is reality. So again, we know the truth. One animal isn't going to turn into another animal. The next question, could chemicals come alive? Well, the simplest cell is the most complex machine, way more complex than any factory or automobile or rocket ship that mankind has ever made. The individual thousands of parts needed for even a bacteria are way more complex than the machined parts inside of an automobile. And none of those parts occur naturally. Now, I want to show you what these parts look like. They're called proteins, and they're like a long string of beads. Now, the individual beads are called amino acids, and there's 20 different colors. God designed it this way. Now, if you have got a little machine like a pin, it has lots of different parts, and the parts are shaped exactly right to become a pin. Same thing inside of this bacteria. All those complex parts that are listed there, they have to have exactly the right shape. How do they get the shape? These proteins have these little beads that are different shapes, and because they're placed in a certain order, the whole chain will bend and fold and turn and twist to form exactly the right shape that will then function as a part inside of a little living machine called a bacteria. Your cells are the same way, but far more complex. Let me show you what one protein looks like. Okay, this is one of the parts that's inside of the living cell. Okay, so now every single color, every one of these beads has to be in exactly the right spot. There's a disease called sickle cell anemia where if this were hemoglobin, hemoglobin is a protein, and it has to have exactly the right shape in our blood, so it will bend and twist and fold in just the right way to hold the maximum amount of oxygen. And if one of the beads is in the wrong spot, it just switched with a different one, then the whole chain doesn't quite form the right shape, and most people will die of a young age and live a miserable life because their blood doesn't carry oxygen the right way, because of one bead in the wrong place. Now you can calculate, could just 20 random colors randomly, because evolution's just got random chance, it's blind. Could it randomly grab a bead and put the first one in the right spot, the second one in the next spot, the third one in the next spot, so the whole thing will twist and form the right shape? And it turns out it's an absolute impossibility to even get 50 beads in the right spot. The average protein has 400. This one has 3,000. Some proteins have 50,000. It could never happen. It's a scientific impossibility. So we know the truth. Even the parts of life could never make themselves. Now let me show you this really interesting little movie of one bacteria and what it has. This bacteria has 7 purple, perfectly formed gears. These gears have this shape because of the arrangement of the protein molecules. They're surrounded by 21 little green gears. Each of these purple gears has a little motor attached to it, an electric motor. The motor turns the purple gears. The green gears make sure they all turn at the same speed in the same direction. And those spin little hairs that form a little propeller that the bacteria uses to kind of drive itself around looking for food inside of your body or someplace else. Isn't that cool? This is supposedly one of the simplest forms of life. And then if you look at the motor, this is the motor that's driving that little flagellum or that little hair at the back. It has 40 different parts. Now this is just the motor. And every part has to be exactly the same right shape, in exactly the right position, placed at the right spot, in all of it. Does anybody think if there's a motor driving one of these fans, and you were to reach in and just pull out one of the parts, any one of the parts that makes that motor work, will that motor continue to work? Absolutely not. How could they have all gotten there? The right shape, the right place, the right size, and the right position. Intelligent design. There's no other possible explanation. So we all know God made these things, fully formed, fully functional. You couldn't just do it a piece at a time. It all has to be there. So it is so obvious the respect and the obedience we owe to someone that, and by the way, you could put 10,000 of these motors lined up side by side by side by side in the width of a human hair. And they outperform in speed and capabilities any motor any human being has ever made. Think of that. We should be in awe of the one who did all this. Now, that kind of deals with how we can know God exists. But creation does more than just that for us. You see, creation also teaches us many, many other things. And this is a verse. It says, ask the beasts and they shall teach you, the birds of the air and they shall tell thee. Now, transition, and I do this because this is a lot of technical stuff these kids have just absorbed, so this is a break in the presentation, okay? I want to talk about how we could have learned things. And the thing we're going to look at is flight. Whoops, hang on a second. Why didn't it move forward? Again, I think it just locked up. Hang on a second. Okay, we're going to look at flight. How did mankind learn to fly? Now, I want you to think about this. How many of you guys, and I do this with every crowd I speak to, when you were young, how many of you had a reoccurring dream that you could fly? Raise your hand if you did. I have never been in any crowd where somewhere between a third and half of the people haven't had that dream. I did. I miss it. I loved that dream. But when I would have it like for years, I could at will fly. Okay, how many of you guys love to make paper airplanes when you were young? Raise your hand. Anybody make paper airplanes? How many of you guys wished that you guys were like Superman when you were young? Okay? Oh, here we go. He's here with us today. Superman. We all did. I think from the time Adam and Eve were created, they were looking up at the birds and wishing, oh man, I wish I could fly. Now, in the 1850s, we learned how to take photographs. They were called tintypes, and we have them of the Civil War. In the 1880s, Edison figured out how to link together a bunch of photographs and make movies. And we have some early movies from the 1880s and 1890s of mankind trying to fly. And I strung them together. I want you to watch this little film of mankind's early attempt at flight. Okay. Boy, my computer is giving me fits. Oh, okay, hang on. It's giving me fits tonight. I'm going to escape it again. Just give it a second. See if this does it. Spinning. Huh. Okay, I'm going to go back. Forward. Okay. All right, I am going to go, hang on. I'm just going to take us. Just give me some patience. Why is it doing that? I'm going to minimize this and I'm going to go directly to the file. Oh, man. You know what I'm going to do? I'm shutting this down and I'm going to go to the file. If you've never spoken to people, this is really frustrating when this happens. So I appreciate your grace. Yeah. Okay. Give it a moment. Okay, now I'll go find the file and we'll play it. That is really weird. It's like it's on the wrong screen. It's like the screen in front of me isn't the right screen. So now I got to move this down to video clips. You can tell I got a lot of files. Miscellaneous teaching aids. And or for the one about flight. Early flight montage, right there. Why isn't it playing? You say it's downloading? You know, I just like, yeah, it's in the cloud, all right. I just like 3 months ago, my computer was getting really slow, so I went to a new computer, and now everything's on the cloud. So now it doesn't like just come right up. It's so aggravating. When we're done, do that. But how come it won't find it? How come it isn't playing? Yeah, see, it's probably, I bet it's not getting an internet signal, so my computer's not on the church internet. If I right-click, I don't know. This is probably why it didn't play for my presentation either. Does that help at all? Oh, bummer. Oh, that's such a shame. We're just going to have to skip it. I don't want to spend 10 minutes of your time doing all this. But anyway, I show this really funny montage of people flapping things that look like wings, and they're on old-fashioned things. They're pedaling, and a guy puts a plane over a cliff and crashes, and a guy comes down a ramp and does a loop-de-loop, and they all fail, okay? And then I'm just bummed out. I found an original film of the Wright brothers in December of 1903 at Kitty Hawk. They flew in a straight line, and they went and got a bunch of reporters and a bunch of cameras, and they came back the next day, and they filmed both Orville and Wilbur climbing onto that plane, and they take off. A big weight drops to make it shove forward, and it takes off, and it soars over the reporters, and it flies and does turns and banks, and it's set to music, and it's just stunning. I mean, to see them 18 years ago, the very first time mankind had ever flown. It is just really stunning. It sends chills up and down your spine. Sorry, it's on the videos, by the way. The Rocks Cry Out. It is in there. But yeah, I am crippled by technology that I don't understand, and I should have gotten on the internet and didn't realize it. Never have to in the Fiji because you have to show me how to disable that so it doesn't think it has to go to the internet to find my files when we're all done. Okay, in the meantime, let's pull the presentation back up. See, now it won't do anything. Now I can't even get back to my presentation. All right. I know. I'm not sure how many more I have. I forget. Okay, I pull this over here. Now I can see what I'm doing. So we're going to go to presentations. I'm going to go to my 2022 presentations. Here we are in Prozer, and we're doing the 45-minute school presentation. All right, we're about 2/3 of the way through. So as soon as this pulls up, not only that, but well, I can do this part because it doesn't involve a video. Let's see if it comes up. Okay. But it's not only learning to fly. As planes got faster and faster, we started to, again, look at birds to see how are birds designed. Because now you've got planes flying 400 miles an hour. They've got to slow way down in order to land, and they lose their lift. And I explained how the Wright brothers understood how creation operates in order to develop an airplane that would actually fly. So they looked at the fastest bird they could find, and it's called the swift bird. It literally flies, and I'm overseas, so I use kilometers. Fastest bird on level flight, 140 kilometers an hour. That's like 104 miles per hour, faster than anything on the expressway. Flies almost continuously. They've tracked them, and they believe these birds will fly 2.5 million miles in their lifetime. It's like 8 times all the way to the moon, around and back again, or 100 times around the earth. As a matter of fact, they don't like to stop to drink. They love to fly so much. They'll just swoop down, open their mouth, grab a drink of water, and swoop back up without ever landing on a lake or a river. They sleep while they're flying. Scientists try to figure out how do they fly at night and they don't stop. Turns out they will literally close one eye and half of their brain shuts down and it goes to sleep. Then they'll close the other eye and the other half of their brain sleeps. Now, we say, now you young boys, don't try that in math class because it doesn't work for us. They make babies while flying. They don't bother to stop just to build the nest and lay the eggs, okay? So this bird loves to fly. Now you'll notice this bird, its wings are swept back. They're not straight out. But all those early airplanes, their wings were straight out. But modern airplanes, the wings are always swept back. So they copied the bird design. So now you have a really fast bird plane, but when it slows down to land, it will lose its lift and it'll just flutter like a leaf. It's called stalling. So again, airplane designers, they started to look at great big heavy birds. How do they land without crashing? And they noticed they all have this thing that comes out at the front edge of their wing. It's got an extra feather. And it's the same thing with airplanes. They put flaps on the front edges. They come out, cause more air to go over the top of the wing, give them extra speed at slower speeds. Now we're going to transition. We're going to talk about where did all the fossils come from? Where did all the rocks come from? You see, there are trillions of dead animals in these rock layers all around us. How did they get in those rock layers? And you'll read in your textbooks that over millions of years they were slowly buried by sediment and layer after layer formed, and as animals died, their bodies got trapped and their bodies got replaced with minerals and they turned into fossils. And that's where they came from, and that's what you'll read about. But in the Bible, you read about something very, very different. You read about a flood that covered the entire earth. It would have killed animals, burying them in sediment. It would have laid down extensive layers of rock across the entire earth. It would have dug up every tree and every blade of grass and packed it down, and just the heat and the pressure would have turned it into coal seams, and water rushing off the land at the end of this year-long event would have carved out river valleys. But that means all that stuff had to have happened very fast and very recently. And that's what the Bible tells us. This is just one statement. It says the waters of this flood prevailed exceedingly upon the whole earth, and all of the high hills that were under the entire heaven were covered. So this event talked about in the Bible was not some little local event. It was on the whole earth, everything under heaven. Now, how do we know whether this flood created the rocks and the fossils and the dead animals, or how do we know whether it was huge periods of time? As a matter of fact, one of the things we're going to look at are dinosaur fossils. Everybody loves dinosaurs. And we are told that there has not been a dinosaur walking upon this planet in 65 million years. No one has ever seen a dinosaur. Well, roar. We now have to have a roar. Okay, the dinosaur's supposed to go roar as he comes in. And then he'll often go and he'll start to eat the students. But they have the same response. It's, you know, it's like, it's just totally unexpected. And it's, again, it's that adding of emotion and enjoyment to what they're hearing. So why do we find these big bones of dinosaurs in these rock layers? Because when a tree dies, it doesn't turn into a rock. If your dog dies and you bury it, and you come back 10 or 100 years later, the bones aren't even there. They've just disintegrated back into soil. They don't turn into rocks. To form a fossil, you have to have the right recipe. It's the fossil recipe. You see, to keep it from deteriorating, to keep bacteria and fungus and wind and erosion from destroying something that's died, even the bones, you have to bury it really, really fast. Otherwise, it's going to disappear. You have to bury it really, really deep. You have to have lots of water that would have just come with lots of sediment and going whoomph, just cover it up, whatever it is that just died. And you have to keep away oxygen, because all these things will keep it from happening. So somewhere in the past, there's a dinosaur just walking along, just dum-de-dum-dum-dum, and on the flood happens, picking up enormous amounts of sediment, sweeping it across the land, and whoomp, that body is buried really fast, really deep. Water is just percolating down through there, not just for a few hours, but for days and weeks and months, carrying minerals with it. The flesh decays away, and the bones get replaced with minerals that turn them to rock. And then, over time, erosion happens, and the bones get exposed, and we find these fossils. See, but it had to happen fast and deep. And there's all sorts of evidence for this. Now, here's what you're told in your textbooks. But way back when, there's a fish that dies, and slowly sediment comes and kind of gathers around it, and then it gets covered up, and then over millions of years, the layers form, and the fish turns into a rock. Well, is that true or not? When a fish dies, it doesn't sink. We've all seen this. Dead fish float. They just bloat and float. So do dead bodies. And then other fish come and they kind of nibble at it and eat it away, and all the bits and pieces fall to the bottom. And nobody goes swimming in the ocean or a lake, and they look down there and there's all these perfectly formed fish laying there in the process of turning into fossils. It doesn't happen. See, the explanation you're giving doesn't work, but a flood would explain it. And when we look at fossilized fish, I mean, look at this intricately preserved rock that is called a fossil. You can see every little spine and barb of the fish. Now, here was a fish in the process of eating lunch. It's eating another fish, and whomp, it just got crushed with a bunch of sediment, and it's preserved as a fossil in the middle of eating its lunch. How long does it take you to eat your lunch? About, maybe 500,000 years? No. That had to happen fast. Here's a ichthyosaur. It's an ancient sea creature, and it kind of living at the time that the dinosaurs were lived. They all lived at the same time before the flood. It is in the process of giving birth to a baby. And it was crushed fast. Does a mother take, several thousand years for that baby to come out of its birth canal as it's slowly covered up by dirt? I hope not, right, women? No. It happens relatively fast once it's on its way out. And there was another baby up here. So it wasn't just two babies and little fish being crushed. It was in the middle of the birthing process. There is a fossil so common that they have a special name for it, and we find it by the millions all over the earth. It's called coprolite. And I'll show you a picture of it, but I want to pass it around. There's a couple different pieces of it. Matter of fact, scientists in paleontology just kind of touch it, and we'll let the kids touch this stuff. They can become coprologists, spending their entire life studying this kind of fossil and doing nothing else. Now, at this point, I let people know, by the way, scientists like to name things with fancy names. What this actually is dinosaur poop. You guys are handling fossilized poop. And I love it when I do it when they do that with the kids, especially the girls. The girls will start wiping off their hands and handing it to someone else really quick, and everybody starts laughing. And I let them know, it's solid rock. Okay, we'll have questions later. Okay, well, quick question. Can you what? You'll break a tooth if you try to eat it because there's no poop left. It's solid rock, okay? You'll pass it on around, okay? But here's something I do. One of the ways you can identify a fossil is that the rocks, the minerals that have formed the fossil are often a little bit salty. So you can actually lick a fossil to get the taste. So we'll sometimes take the coprolite and we'll go take a big lick of it after we've told them what it is. And then again, everybody laughs. But it's solid rock. There's nothing original left there. But here's the point. When your dog poops, does it turn into a solid rock? Never. Never happens. But there are billions of pieces of fossilized poop all over the planet. They're so common, you can go on eBay, you can type in coprolite, and hundreds, if not thousands of people will show up with people selling it. Those things cost $20 or $30. They're that common, okay? It's all over the world. All this stuff is turned to solid rock. So the whole world is filled with fossils that formed rapidly. So this idea of evolution is nonsense. The evidence is all there. Another thing, all sorts of animals like birds and dinosaurs that have these real long necks, a large percentage of them, when we find them and the whole body's there, they're always bent over in this. They throw their neck back and their mouth is open. It's called the death pose. It's really, really common. We know when an animal dies of drowning, that's the last thing they do, gasping for breath. If they have a long neck, they throw their neck back and open their mouth, and then they'll die. And then they get buried. They all died of drowning. Isn't that interesting? And then one last example. This was from Peru. There's this national park in Peru where they have over 40 full-size whales, and their entire bones have been turned. The carcasses, the bones are left, they've been turned to solid rock, and now they've been exposed. When a whale dies in the ocean, there are actually, one of the pages in one of the devotionals talks about a acid-oozing, bone-eating snot worm. That's the scientific name of this thing, acid-oozing, bone-eating snot worm, because it oozes something that looks like snot, and it's got acidic acid, and it eats away at whale bones. So God put things in the ocean that recycles even whale bones. They could never lay there, and they did an experiment where they sunk a whale, they put up cameras, and within months, the bones were gone. So they never are going to have time to slowly get covered up and turn into a fossil. And yet here's all these whales that are fully formed. And we find fossil graveyards all over the world. And then last, I talk about a dinosaur that's been found, and the researcher discovered there's soft, stretchy tissue, blood cells, DNA, all sorts of stuff inside of this whale that couldn't possibly be there. And I show a little film.
The scientific world is
I'll
still
show this
reeling
film.
from the discovery of actual Tyrannosaurus rex cells and soft tissue unearthed last week at a Montana excavation site.
Thank you for having me.
So, is that amazing to find this kind of soft tissue in a fossil this old? And what can the soft tissue really tell us?
Well, it's very amazing. It's utterly shocking, actually, because it flies in the face of everything that we understand about how tissues
Well,
and
it's
cells
70
degrade.
million years old. You don't expect to find soft tissue, do you?
Not at all. No, it was utterly shocking.
So you have to sort of rewrite the book as far as fossilization goes, I assume.
Well, that's the exciting part for me. I've always been very intrigued by how things change in going from a living being to part of the rock record. And like I said, a lot of our science doesn't allow for this. All of the chemistry and all of the molecular breakdown experiments that we've done.
You know,
Okay, now I stop it right there. All of our chemistry, all of our molecular breakdown experiments show that tissue is going to be long gone within thousands or tens of thousands of years. It couldn't be millions of years old. It's just going to be gone. All the molecules are going to fly apart. So we know those bones aren't millions of years old, which means we know the rock layers aren't millions of years old. And there's no denying it. We've found soft tissue in hundreds of fossils now that we've started looking. Trilobites and fish and reptiles and dinosaurs, all sorts of fossils, they still have unfossilized proteins, these molecule chains. And they're all really fragile and they all fly apart at a known rate. So we know the truth. Creation is here because God made it. The universe is here because God made it. People are here because God made them. And it hasn't been millions of years ago because the rock layers show us those animals died recently. And the evidence is everywhere all around us. And it all agrees with what God has told us about every piece of this. So we need to understand that it's true. So why are scientists so blind to it? One of the main reasons is they're trained to leave God out of their thinking, and they can only teach and speak and write if they agree with the majority opinion. And I want to show you how powerful that is, and I hope this video works. But I always end with, why are people so blind? Because the Bible says we're like sheep, and we just tend to go along with what everybody else says and what everybody else does. It's just human nature. And the Bible says all of us are like sheep because we've gone astray. We've all sinned against God. See how I work that thread in amongst the whole presentation? Because it's leading to the climax at the end. So watch this little film about how powerfully we are affected by the way other people think and the way other people act. And we'll see if it works. Yeah, good, it does. So bring the volume up a little bit on this one. And this is the wrap up.
And here she is, right on time for her 12 o'clock appointment.
Hi, how are you doing?
This woman thinks she's here for a free eye exam.
Have you been here before? No, it's my first time.
What she doesn't know is that everyone else in this room is working for us.
They'll be with you in just a couple minutes.
Today we're running an experiment on social conformity, and the test starts now. Did you hear that? These people sure did. It doesn't take long for our test subject to notice a pattern. Beep means stand up. But why? And if you were in her shoes, what would you do the next time the tone sounds? To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
So now all the actors are leaving. She's the only one that doesn't know what's going on. But she's been trained to stand up when that beep sounds.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Thanks so much.
Now, the people in Fiji have a phenomenal sense of humor. When he gets ready to stand up, they're laughing so hard they can't even hear what's going on.
So I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think.
Similar forces shape the way we think. That was the wrap-up statement that you might not have heard. So I'm able to tell the students, you know, the reason you're reading all this stuff about evolution and the millions of years in your book isn't because it's true. It's because people are trained to think that way, and they assume because everybody else believes it, it must be true. They're just told it over and over again. Doesn't mean it is true. You've got to use your own minds and think about what is truth, what is reality, what's the evidence actually show. And you will always find out it agrees with what God has told us. And furthermore, he warns us. He says, do not be conformed to this world, because humans are always out to escape the accountability from God. They look for a way to make up their own rules, to do their own thing, to decide what for themselves, what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false. And they leave God out of their thinking, so they're guaranteed to misinterpret biology because they leave God out. They misinterpret geology in the past because they leave what God has told us out. And don't think like that. Look for the truth. And you'll always find that what God has told us is the truth, and then you'll know his will. You'll know his character. But more important than knowing that God is creator is knowing where you're going to spend eternity and understanding what God has done for you personally, how much he loves you. And that's where we're going to end. We're going to have the pastor or the missionary explain what God has done for you, not just what he's done by making creation. And it's just a phenomenal segue. It's like teeing up a ball, you know, for someone to then drive forward. So you get a feel for it. All of a sudden, Christianity becomes real. It's not just a religious concept. And it's folks like you that make it possible by praying for these trips, by helping fund the trips. So make sure you're on the newsletter list. And as opportunity arises, I put out opportunity for people to come along and be part of these trips. And we're going to have one in Peru next year where we're going to take 4 teams down. We're going to distribute 20,000 books in the fall of next year. We'll leave a team for a week in Lima, a team up in the mountains, and then there'll be time to sightsee while you switch places with 2 other teams. So just keep it in mind. And being on the newsletter list, you know what's going on. So it's encouraging. God is moving. He's doing stuff that I never thought could happen. And it's affecting. I mean, think if every student in America heard this presentation and got one of those books. It would have an impact on a lot of kids' thinking. But we're not allowed to here in America. We've got to do it one at a time individually, and it's what we need to be doing. Thank you for this whole week, a chance to share all this stuff, a chance to wrap it up by this encouraging thing that God's doing in other parts of the world. So, any questions? I'll be out at the book table. And thank you. Yeah, okay, quick question. Yes. Yes. Everything was gone in the flood. People think, oh, the pyramids are from before the flood. The pyramids are made out of limestone that formed during the flood. Every building, every structure, everything that was alive except on the ark is gone. Absolutely, without a doubt. They probably were separated. I mean, I wouldn't build my house right next to a bunch of Tyrannosaurus rexes running around. And I think they were fairly regional. They probably had habitats where they developed really well, and that's probably not where there were lots of humans. But Noah was told to take 2 of every kind of land-dwelling animal on the ark. Dinosaurs would have been land-dwelling animals. He wouldn't have grabbed the biggest Tyrannosaurus rexes and Apatosaurus he could find. He would have brought young ones. And God sent the animals to Noah. See, every part of that account makes sense when you understand that it was real. God's the only one who knew the genetic makeup so that 2 of the dog kind could come, but they'd have all the information in their DNA to create all the breeds of dogs afterwards. If Noah would have selected, I mean, I would have probably grabbed a couple golden retrievers, but they only have this little subset of all the information needed. See, all the dog breeds came from a couple things that probably looked like gray wolves. All the variety was there. And then we breed and breed and breed, and we get rid of all the other information, and we end up with a little subset of information, and we have Dachshunds and Chihuahuas and, you know, all the different kind of wolfhounds and different breeds of dogs. It's just little pieces of that broad. Only God knew the big pool of genetics that were needed, so he sent the animals. But after the flood, all the civilizations developed. The Egyptians, the Indians, the Chinese, the Peruvians, and so on. All of these different people groups, almost all of them have stories of dragons, and they all have pictures and descriptions of things that sound like dinosaurs after the flood. So dinosaurs even lived with mankind after the flood. But, I mean, I want you to think about time in this way. How many of you can name, like, your ancestors that lived during the Middle Ages in the 1500s? How many of you know hardly anything about life in the 1500s? That's 500 years ago. And it's so ancient, we can't even begin to connect with it. Now think about 4,000 years ago. That is so long ago, we know nothing about it. And I think those dinosaurs probably died out in the first few thousand years. They were either didn't adapt well, or they were probably hunted out of existence. We almost wiped out the elephants and the lions and the tigers, and lots of things have went extinct since the flood. But we still have this remembrance of them called dragons, all over all these cultures, because they were around with us both before and after the flood. The bones are in the ground from the flood. The pictures, the remembrances, the descriptions of things that look and sound like dinosaurs are from cultures after the flood. So, see, they really do fit into Earth history, and there's lots of evidence for it. It just all gets ignored. Good question. Anything else? And all this stuff's described in various ways and examples of it and pictures of it in the books. Thank you.
He's got lots of books. He's got lots of books there in the lobby.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell you this, but our VBS is in July.
Next month.
Next
Coming
month.
up quick.
And guess what our theme is?
Creation.
Creation.
It's a great theme. Good job.
So those books are going to come in handy.
Yeah.
We'll use those. At
And
our
by the way,
VBS.
if someone would like to donate one of these full color books to all the kids at VBS so they have their own copy,
Yeah, that's a great
I
idea.
sell them by the case at $7 each.
Yeah.
So it would be a neat gift for these kids.
Yeah, for sure. We'll make sure every kid gets a devotional, and but he'll be at the table. You know, I know you guys got questions. Get with him. He's gonna be leaving here tonight.
When we're done.
Pray for his safe travel flying back to Michigan.
Yeah, I have a 6 a.m. flight out of Spokane, so I'll be heading out early. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I hope it goes.
That's right. Amen. But it's been a pleasure. Also, if you haven't given a love offering, okay, someone was asking me, the love offering, that's also his travel together. So if you would like to give to that, the guys will be in the back. If you want to give on Easy